Okay. So we are going to get started. I don't want us to be sitting too long, and I want to give you space to ask questions. So first, thank you so much for joining our presentation for repurposing your content through podcasting. Hey, Keisha. I think I figured it out. So I think I'm cool. I think. Okay, yeah, I figured it out. So we're going to get started and go into what I like to do for people is give them perspective before I ask or teach. So I know podcasting can be a different like space, and we're used to Facebook Live, we're used to Instagram, or using Twitter or TikTok, whatever form of media you're using. But podcast has been something that like has totally like jumped on the scene. So imagine having your audience's undivided attention for 26 whole minutes. According to Nelson Media Research, that's how long people listen to podcasts. That's compared to reading blogs for 4 to 6 minutes, viewing a YouTube for 4 to 5 minutes, or scrolling through Instagram for less than 6 minutes. 26 minutes gives you more than enough time to share your message and connect with your audience. Let me know in the chat. So one thing about me, I'm very interactive, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, but let me know how you're currently engaging with your audience. Are you blogging? Are you on YouTube? Are you on Facebook Live or on Instagram? Let me know in the chat. Facebook. Okay. Anybody else use Facebook? Anybody else using other means? Are you using a blog? Are you using Facebook Live and YouTube? Okay. And how is your engagement so far using Facebook Live, YouTube? Is your audience engaging with you? Have you paid attention to how long they are on your lives or your Facebook engagement? No? Okay. I'll wait. Well, I'll let y'all respond and I'll keep going. So 62 million global daily listeners. Facebook Live, YouTube just started saying usually unlisted videos. Okay. So 62 million global daily listeners. That is how many people are listening to podcasts daily. 62 million. Podcast listeners aren't limited to listening at home, but you can listen while working out or on the go. So it's not restrictive as a Facebook Live. Like I can literally put my phone in my pocket and tune into a podcast. So I think that's a really good thing to consider as you are thinking about starting a podcast. And podcast listeners are usually listening around 7 times a week. So that's a lot of opportunity to be able to reach your audience. So before we get started and I tell you how to repurpose your content in podcasting, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Shivawn Mitchell. I'm the founder of Sam Studios and Good News Co. I am an award-winning filmmaker, an executive producer, podcast producer, published author, but my story didn't start there. I was a counselor, a co-owner of a boutique, blogger, and an online magazine publisher. You can consider me as something as a Jane of all trades. Like that's what my dad said to me. I realized I was searching for something I hadn't seen, the ability to use my voice as a Christian creative outside of church plays. I'm here to equip you to tell your stories in media and entertainment through podcasting. I also hold a degree in counseling and an MFA in screenwriting. So the reason why I did that is because, and let me know as I'm talking, a lot of times we see ourselves one way. A lot of us could be in leadership. You could be a pastor, you could be a business owner, and that's the only way we see ourselves. And that that makes us limit who we are or how we can operate or how we can show up. So if you're usually showing up as a pastor on Facebook or someone in leadership, you usually talk to your audience that way only. So I want you to take a minute to think about who you are. Like, what does that look like? Are you a teacher? Are you a coach? Are you a business owner? And I want you to tell me in the chat, like, what hats do you wear? Because a lot of times in social media, we're told to pick one thing. And don't get me wrong, I don't want you to be out here juggling 8 million things. But because of all of the things that I've done in life, it shaped me to be an awesome podcast producer, TV producer. And it's because for a counselor, I learned how to listen to what people weren't saying. So when I engage with them on the podcast, I know what questions to ask. So I want you to tell me in the chat who you are. Are you a leader? Are you a business owner? Are you a mom? I want you to start thinking about that. And that's something I do often. I call it running my tab up. And that just simply looks like I affirm who God says I am. And a lot of times we allow other people to dictate who we are, and that limits how God can use us. That's good. What type of leadership are you in, Alice? Christian education director. Okay, that's good. Anybody else want to add? And engagement helps because then I can answer your questions as we go along. So why do we need to repurpose our content? So before we, media ministry team member, okay. Before we reheat a message, let's consider this. So everybody knows that your Thanksgiving dinner, day 2, is so much better. If you agree with me, I want you to drop a 1 in the comments. Day 2, Thanksgiving, exactly. Day 2, Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner is always so much better. And it is the thought that I had, like when you reheat it, you get to choose what you want. So on day 2, when Shivawn goes back for her Thanksgiving dinner, what I do is I get macaroni and cheese, I get yams, I get turkey, and I choose what I want. I decide what I want to reheat. And that's what I want us to do. We're going to choose what we are going to repurpose. And I want you to think of it in food because I'm the analogy queen. So the reason why I said that is because what is happening when people are repurposing their content from one space to the next, it's turning into like a TV dinner. And everybody knows TV dinners are not good at all. Like it's pre-packaged. It's not too much love or thought put into it. And we care about our audience. We care about the people that we are engaging with. So we want to make sure that whatever message that we are reheating, it is done with love. And it's not something we're just throwing together to say that we're over here in this space. So before I tell you what we're going, and I use my hands a lot, so don't pay me any mind. What does repurposing look like and what does that even mean? It just basically means that we are modifying a message or something we have to fit a new use. So it's a new use. So let's say for the people who are on Facebook Live and you have content, or let's say for the people who have had conferences and you had a great message. What we're doing is we're taking that great message and we're putting it over here on our podcast. And that simply looks like you're going to take 15 minutes of whatever you taught, whatever the teaching was, and we're going to transfer it over here to our podcast. But we're not finished yet. So 15 minutes of the meat of your message, whatever you go back and listen to, and this requires work. Repurposing isn't something that is automatic where you pick it up and you shuffle it to another space. So you're going to take this and you're going to take the 15 minutes. And then what you're going to do to repurpose it is we're going to pay attention to our audience. So you're putting on the hat of a producer. When we go on Facebook, when we go on Instagram, we do a lot of consuming. But as a podcaster, as a person of authority, you are going to need to be a producer. And that just simply looks like you are filling in the gap. You are meeting the need. You are telling the people what they need. And that's because we pay attention. So from your Facebook Live, what you're going to do, or from your conference, you're going to go and you're going to start to look and see where your people are saying, hey, I have a question. Or wait, I had a light bulb moment. Or what about this? You're going to start to go and pay attention to what they're saying. So from that, you can tailor questions to answer on the repurposed content that we took 15 minutes. So all I'm going to do is now, let's say that Alice said during my training, you know what, can you give me a little bit more information on why 26 minutes matters? So I'm going to take that and I'm going to now add on to the 15 minutes that I took for my original training, and I'm going to go and answer Alice's question. And I'm going to add that, tack it on to the end, so the people hear the meat of my message. Then they hear their questions are being answered. And they're like, wait, okay, maybe this person actually cares about what I'm saying, and they become invested. I think that we assume that when we are repurposing or we're translating people from different spaces, that they are going to have the same needs. They're not going to have the same needs. So I don't want you to talk to the people over here on Facebook the same way you're talking to the people on podcasts. In podcast land, you have the opportunity to not just teach, but you also can show them, I'm a wife, I'm a homeschool educator, I'm a physical therapist. Like, you can now be your full self, and I know with boundaries, and you can communicate with them. And let's say that you don't have too much engagement or you don't have questions. Bring people on like a talk show after the 15 minutes, and y'all discuss that 15 minutes. So then you stay in your sweet spot of 26 to 30 minutes, because we already heard at the top of this presentation that people are engaging for 26 minutes on the podcast. Am I making sense so far? Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? And so even with that, okay, good. So even with that, as we are doing that and we are repurposing, some things that we need to think about, and we're going to cover it as we go further, is now that I have them here, and now that I recognize that I'm a producer, I'm paying attention to what my audience needs, and then also I'm engaging. What do I want them to do when they leave here? I want you to jot that down, because we leave people a lot of times, like, we give them this good information, we are engaging, we, are concerned about them, and then we just leave them there. You would be very surprised. People need instruction. You'll be very surprised. Like, if you, even on your social media, if you don't have some type of call to action, people are just going to consume, and that's it. They're not going to engage. They're not going to become a part of your community. They're not going to show up at your church. They are not going to, because people need to know what to do next. So I want you to think about that. So before you launch, there are some things that you need to consider. You need to consider surveying the field. You need to consider finding the one versus the crowd, and you need to have a clear message. Does everybody believe that they have a clear message? If you do, drop me a 1. If you think you're not too clear on your message, and give me a 2. Okay, great. So in order to survey the field, what that looks like, okay, Alice, we're going to get to a clear message. Got you covered. So what it looks like to survey your field is your current digital space safe? Do you believe that your digital space is safe? And that is determined by a couple of things. Are you consistent? Consistency equals trust. So, for example, we think that consistency means I have to show up as a person on podcast, Facebook Live, Instagram, blogging. I have to show up Monday through Sunday. That is not what it is. And I know that people on social media are telling you that, and that's just not the case. Consistency looks like, okay, I have 2 different podcasts that I produce. One of them, everybody knows that on Sunday, I'm going to put out a podcast, and on Wednesday you're going to get a newsletter. I am consistently showing up on Sunday, and I am consistently talking to them on a newsletter on Wednesday. So now I'm building trust. They see me in their inbox. They get their alert. They get the notification. And I want us to start thinking about our digital space as our house. Like, if you're in relationship with people, I can't be LaKesha's friend and I talk to her once a month, and then all the other times that she calls me, I don't respond. So I want you to start thinking about, what does your consistency look like? And are you demonstrating unknowingly that you aren't someone that people can trust because you show up whenever? And then do you only communicate with them when you have something going on at your address? We do this a lot of times. We will show up on our Facebook Live. We will show up and we will want to have conferences. We will show up and want people to subscribe to our podcast. And we have not engaged with them any on social media. Or we'll have a book. It will be like, hey, everybody, buy my book. But you haven't talked to them. You haven't said anything to them. And then do you pay attention to what your digital community needs? And we talked about that earlier. That just looks like I am not just talking at people. How many people in here you can just pull up on your friend and talk to them and tell them all your needs. And then when they get ready to open their mouth and tell you what they need from you, you were like, okay, I got to call you back. How long is that relationship going to last? It's not going to last. So how we pay attention to what our digital community needs, it's really easy. So I know a lot of us, and it's nothing wrong with it at all, we want to do market research and we don't get responses, but your market research is in your DM. When people respond and they're like, you know what, that resonated with me, take note of that, write it down. Or when people engage with you after you posted something, take note of that, write it down, and then engage with them. Say, thank you. Like, why did that reach you? Can we talk about it a little bit more in our DM? And I'm not saying respond to people who say crazy stuff in your DMs, but I want to take some of the pressure off of us of like having to do all of these surveys when it's people right here in your community who are talking to you every day. And then does your address identity change so much that people don't know what they're going to get? So as I said earlier, I definitely was a Jane of all trades. I was talking to everyone about everything. I had a blog. I was a co-owner of a boutique. I was a counselor. I was all of these things. And like people were seeing it and it was confusing. And the reason why it was confusing is because I didn't own like who I was. At heart, I'm a creative who needs to talk to Christians. Now, does that mean that you can't be your full self? Absolutely not. Like, you can be your full self. And for me, that just simply looks like, hey, I am a Christian creative. I love my creative family. And at the heart of it, I also want them to have healthy hearts so they're not bleeding on their audience. So that's the counselor in me. I love creativity, so I'm going to push you to like think outside the box. And then where the boutique and the blog, that boutique, it taught me how to run a business, and the blog, it taught me how to communicate with my people. So we cannot impact a culture we do not engage with. So who are we, not engaging with? And are we trying to emulate what the culture is doing versus the culture coming to us and saying, hey, like, how can I show up? And that just simply looks like us spending time with God. How often do we jump on social media and before we talk to God? Like, he's the ruler over the whole entire universe. So surely he has some great ideas that he wants to tell us. And that just simply starts with us engaging with God first. So far, does anybody have any questions before I keep going? Yes, LaKesha, you need to engage more. We all do. Okay, so exactly. Start with God. We want to get all the information and then we want to leave God out. So finding the one. All right. So instead of attempting to reach everyone, get laser clear with the one person. And that just simply looks like talking to the person that you want to fill in the gap for them. So for me, for my podcast, my tagline, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit more, it's connecting the dots for storytellers, showing them it's possible to live their filmmaking dreams. So I'm very clear. I'm talking to creative storytellers and I want them to live their filmmaking dreams. I'm not talking to anybody else. In the times that I used to force it and I was like, I want to save the whole entire creative world, I sounded like that. I sounded all over the place. When we attempt to talk to everyone, we often walk away feeling overwhelmed, and that leads to inconsistency. Give me a one if you've been inconsistent with talking to your people. So as you are talking to your people and you are getting clear on who they are, you need to picture that one person when you're talking to them, and that will help you tailor your messaging around that one individual, and it'll help you stay focused and consistent. And I want to give you just a tip. The one person that you're talking to is usually the old you. Even in leadership, even when we're preaching or we're teaching, it's usually it starts with us. Like God comes to us, like God checks us, and then he like heals us, he develops us. And then we look back and we're like, you know what? I want to help that old me. And that's what it was. When I was in film school, I was the only lady, the only brown girl. I was the only Christian, and I felt so isolated. And I just knew when I left, I said, I don't ever want to be in a position that there are Christians who want to extend their reach using their voice, and I don't help them. So I want you to take some time during the weekend and think about, like, who are you talking to? Is it the old you? Is it a problem that somebody came to you with and you like felt a burning desire to solve it? And if you know me, you know I always talk about, like, I want us to think outside the box as creatives, and I will rant about that. So it's a pain point I saw, and I said, I'm going to solve the issue. The one person will see your consistency, feel welcomed, and then tell others about you. A lot of times we spend so much money on marketing, and not saying that you don't need to have marketing, but we spend so much money on marketing when if we would treat our one person right, they're going to tell the next person. Every lady that's in here, there is also a man. I'm not going to leave you out. But you know, if somebody does your hair nice, I'm going to be like, girl, you need to go check out this hairstylist. I have no problem with telling you about something that's good. I'm going to let you know. And I think that we discount how much we need to engage with our audience or just be present for them, because they're going to tell other people. They will do the legwork for you. And the same thing is true for, if they don't feel good about what you're doing, they're going to tell people too. So it goes both ways. What did you say, Keisha? So true. All of my successful business ventures have been as a result of something I learned. Yep. And want to help others not experience truth. And that's also what it looks like being a believer. Like, we tell people we don't want people to stay where they were. So this is a client review. I worked with Anita as she was transitioning her voice of authority. So she did a lot of conferences, and what happened is she decided to start a podcast. So she had all of this content, because that's what we're doing. We're repurposing content. So she had all this content, and she just was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. And that just happened. It looked like her wanting to be perfect, and she was paralyzed by perfection. Has anybody dealt with that? Like, we get to a place where it's like, it got to be perfect, and you never put it out. So she had like literally over 20 different things that she could put on her podcast, but it had to be perfect. And something that I tell people is, like, it's never going to be perfect. So I want you to always think about this, even as you're starting your podcast. It just simply looks like that we are growing through. Like, people appreciate seeing our journey, but we have lied to ourselves, and I don't know why, especially as believers, where we want to hide our growth. But like, that's a testament to who God is to us. Like, I resonate with people's stories when I see how they've been able to triumph. And then also, she was paralyzed by the design. Listen, my logo for my podcast has changed like 3 times. It doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. I get logos professionally done. I've got them off of Fiverr. But the heart of it is my message good? We get so stuck on like the image, and then you haven't even thought about what you're talking about. She didn't know her pitch, and I talked about that briefly, and it's something I want y'all to practice on here. My pitch was, I connect the dots for storytellers. I show them it's possible to live their filmmaking dreams. So guess what? When she came to me, her words were, Rip Nation is a community that teaches Kingdom singles how to find their unique strategy to win at life and love. You know what? That sounds like, really nice. But I broke it down for her because people have a very short attention span. I said, Rip Nation, teaching you to win at love and life. So if you're in the elevator, and that's where pitch came from, you're in the elevator and you have from floor 1 to 5 to talk to somebody about your idea, about your podcast, and they're willing to be a sponsor or they're willing to tell other people about it or invest in you, you need to grab their attention immediately and you need to leave them room to ask their own questions. So me saying, teaching you to win at love and life. First of all, everybody wants to win at life. Everybody wants to win at love. We're most people. So that allows me to then say to her, well, what does that mean? Like, tell me more. But if you have this long sentence, it's like, okay, that was nice. And people will walk away. So that's just something that we need to work on, is like knowing like bite size how we can communicate what we do, and then connecting with her audience. And that just simply looks like paying attention. So when we talked about earlier, like what's next, what's our plan after people have come and they're invested in hearing from us on our podcast, what is our call to action? So for her, she was starting a community and she was also starting a new book, like going to release a book. So from that, at the end in her show notes, we provided information where her audience could connect with her, and that is leading them to a landing page. And that is simply selling without selling. And I know that's something that we don't talk about as believers, but I want you not to be poor. I want you to be fruitful and multiply. So that means that you have things to offer. If you are engaging with your audience, there's a reason why. Like, you have something that you can teach them. You have something that they need, and they won't know unless you tell them. So with the consistency, with showing up as her authentic self, she was able to earn credibility. So I know earlier I asked did everybody know their message, and I had someone who said they did not. So this is how you get clear. We are using our words and not our neighbor's words. And that simply means, do you have too many people in your ear to the point that you don't even know what your own voice sounds like? So I know it's the top of the year. I know that we're all getting really great information during this conference. And it's like we get in a space where we start to consume so much. It's like, I need to know this. I need to know that. I need to hear all of these things people are telling me, but we don't go to the source. Like, go to God so he can clarify to you who you are, what you sound like, what you have to offer, where he's calling you to, how to show up. Because I used to think that I couldn't be myself. And Shivawn is the person who is direct, who likes to laugh, who is also going to hold you accountable to doing what you're supposed to do. I don't want to be anybody else, because if I'm anybody else, my people aren't going to hear me. And that goes back to being inconsistent. Like, if I'm showing up as anybody else, how are my people hearing me? They're not. So you need to ask yourself, in this season, in this year, who are the people that I need to listen to, and who are the people that I need to not listen to? We need to take an inventory. Do that often, like weekly. Like, hey, God, I'm checking in. Is there anybody that I'm connected to and taking information from that I need to let go of? And that just simply looks like also doing a digital detox. Let me know if you're an iPhone user. All iPhone users, they got us together. You can go and look and check and see how long you are on social media. Go see how many hours you're on there. You'll be so surprised. And needing a digital detox looks like, are you, the first thing when you wake up in the morning, are you getting on social media? That goes back to, like, who are we spending our time with first? And we like to say, like, put God first. It sounds cool, but it requires us to, like, deny ourselves. And we don't want to do that, because listen, I'm guilty of it. I've gotten a lot better, But like, I'm like, oh, let me go check and see what's going on. No, let's check in with God and see like what we're doing, what we're facing today. And then you are here to serve. It is very easy, especially during this time, because of the pandemic and needing to use social media. It's very easy to get caught up in yourself, being me-centered and making the money. And don't get me wrong, we all need to make money because we have bills and we want to live, a reasonably good life. But don't forget that you're here to serve. We need to always keep in the forefront of our mind is I'm here to serve. What does my audience need from me? What am I giving to them? And as I said earlier, you are usually talking to your younger self or the person who wasn't healed or went through the struggle, because we disregard, like, as a business owner, this is year, I think, 11 or 12. And what happened between that time was a lot of bad decisions and then some great decisions. But if I don't ever talk about it, if I don't ever communicate it to people, I'm just allowing my audience to keep making the same bad decisions. And that's not right. Like, we don't go through things to keep it to ourselves. So that's a part of getting clear in your message. So I know most people want to know what I need to buy before I produce. Like, that is always the biggest question. And I want to save you because I made a lot of not great decisions when it came to just what I needed to buy for my podcast before I got started. So these are some things that I had. I know people will be like, oh, you need to spend $100 on a mic. That's not truth. I got my first mic from Amazon for $32. And when I'm doing my own individual podcast, like mine and not the one for my company, I use my iPhone to record because it's just me. And yes, I edit it if necessary, but if you ever go and listen to my personal podcast, I'm sitting outside. You will hear sometimes kids in the background. Sometimes you'll hear an airplane going by, but that lets me connect with my audience. Like, they get it. I'm busy. They're busy. I have something that I need to talk about. And if I put it off, I might not ever do it. So I just don't want you to think that it has to be this cookie cutter perfect thing, because when we're sitting down having a one-on-one conversation with each other for dinner and we're sitting outside or in the restaurant, there's just some background noise. Also, recording. I currently use Zoom. So when I have guests, I use Zoom and hop on and use the audio. It's $14. I used Zencastr before. I did not have a good experience with it, but it was when it was in its early conception. So it might be better, but I just didn't love it. And then also music. So you do need music for your intro and outro. And you can get it from Music Bed. You can get it from Epidemic. And they are like $9.99 and $15.99. And they're reasonably good. Editing software, I use Audacity. Platform hosts, you can use Podbeam, Anchor, Buzzsprout, SoundCloud. There's so many. I currently use Podbeam. And then extras, you need Canva, Wave, a website, newsletter, and logo tagline. But I said all of that to say, we usually want to do things and we don't consider the cost. And I don't mean just like money, I also mean time. So when we talked about consistency, when I first started, I was very ambitious as a podcast producer. I was interviewing 3 people a week. That means I had to edit. That means I had to plan marketing. That means I had to figure out my one-liner. And that's just simply what's going to grab your attention when you're scrolling on social media. And that's an audiogram for those who don't know. And I also was coming up with the images. And so that was a lot of time. And then I didn't account for if I had audio issues, because on Zencastr I did, and I lost audio. So sometimes I had to go back to people and say, can we record this? But I just want you to start thinking about in your schedule and repurposing as a leader, as a business owner, mom, minister, whatever it is. How much time do you really have to dedicate to podcasting? And be honest, because when we are overly ambitious, it usually doesn't work out. We stop. And then people who were engaged are like, okay, so where did they go? And then they kind of start to think that's just what it is for you as a leader or business owner. And I'm not saying that you can't be honest about life happening, because that happened with me for my podcast. I started my personal one and then my granny got sick. But I was honest with my audience, like, hey, I might be hit or miss because like I'm helping to take care of her. So do we have any questions? I think we have time for a couple of questions. Any questions on how to get started? What you should be looking to do? Any questions anybody have? How do you market your podcast? That's a really good question. So can you, I'm gonna ask you a question. Are you currently in leadership? Where do you currently show up? Because we usually can start where we are. So for me, I do a really good job with engaging with people on social media. So that's where I started. Like, I didn't spend money. I just genuinely am invested in people and what they do and encouraging them. So I like was able to grow my podcast very quickly because I offered value to other people. I would respond to their podcast. And so that kind of started my marketing. But then what I did after that, I solicited a lot of sponsors and they were able to do the marketing for me. So we did a lot of bartering. And then I did some marketing on social media and then my personal website. So for me, it was really my personal website because people were already going there and people were already engaging with me there. So I just started there because I knew that I didn't want to exceed a certain budget. Do you currently have a podcast? And does anybody else have any other questions? I don't, but my pastor and wife does. Okay, are you going to assist them with doing the podcast? Because a great place is for them, it just depends too. Like, is their podcast solely about them, or is it referencing they produce it themselves right now? Okay, so is it focused on them, or is it about like sermon leadership type of things? And if anybody else has any questions, you can jump in. And while I'm waiting for her to answer, so if you do have further questions or you need assistance, I did something special for y'all. I have a toolkit that just came out. Actually, it's not out yet. I really wanted y'all to have it first, so you have first dibs. And then also, if you want to schedule a discovery call with me, you can always do that because I do podcasts, but I also create talk shows, and our shows are streamed on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, and we also do live production, mixed interview, and different ministry leaders, and mental health interview with licensed psychologists. Okay, so that's really good. That's a lot of different things. So they could definitely reach out to for marketing, they could reach out to other like the licensed psychologist platform and ask them, do they want to barter? Because if you let's say they don't want to spend any money right now, they could barter and say like, hey, if you post this on ours, we will also, and that's if they're okay with the person. Can you post this on your website about our podcast for 90 days? And then we in exchange will mention you on our podcast. So it's really good to leverage relationships. Like, that's a good way to start with marketing. What is a Christian creative toolkit? Okay, so what that is I have a lot of people who ask me questions on how to get started as a creative, and I go and I literally try to answer a lot of questions. So I give you tips on writing a script, what that looks like, building your screenwriting muscle. Give you tips on how to get started with your podcast, specific questions I ask you. I show you how to pitch. I show you different organizations to be a part of. I show you the pitfalls to avoid. I also give you a different graphics that you need. So it's literally every question that you would need to get started. Well, a lot to get started as a creative. And I just knew that I had a lot of questions and I didn't have anybody that I could ask. So I try to put everything in there. And it's like, this is how you can show up as a Christian creative, because a lot of times it's limited. Right now, the podcast is on Podbeam. Okay, so did you know that Podbeam, have them look into this. They have a way that you can market on there. So they offer you, and I can't think exactly where it is, but I'm gonna put my email in the chat. If you email me, I'll send it to you. But Podbean, because I use that for my business one, has a excellent way to market. And it does require that you're consistent, but it's a really, really good tool. This is my email. And Podbeam also does a lot of training on marketing. So tell them to also check that out. They do a lot of training, and then ads are good. So you can also get ads on there. So the ads from the other people will drive people to their podcast. But you have to be mindful of that. Like, does the ad align with your values and beliefs? Any other questions anybody has for me? You're welcome. No problem. Oh, and I left off too what was in the toolkit. I have contracts in there because a lot of times we engage with people and we don't have contracts. So I have that listed as well, contracts in there. I have links specifically to things that you need to get as a creative, like what's the best camera, those type of things. So it's a lot of information. So if nobody else has any questions, we're gonna end our session. I had a great time with everybody. Thank you so much for joining and asking questions. And I think that there's time. Yeah, we have time to network. So I'm going to go over there and hop in on the networking session. So if you want to ask me any specific questions or just talk, I'll definitely go hang out over there for a little while. All right, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.